merchandise clerks, and other Disneyland employees on Friday voted 99% in support of a walkout.
Can you imagine if it's on strike when they do the earnings call? I don't think they will.
Well, you can give us this, or I can push a button right now, and your employees walk out of the parks 5 minutes from now. That's it. Renegade Online. Keeping this pulse of day. Anybody else? So, but we'll get there. So, Disneyland in Anaheim, California. The workers have voted overwhelmingly to authorize a strike. And this is something that has been coming for the last several weeks. Disneyland employees vote overwhelmingly in favor of authorizing a strike, paving the way for what could be the first major work stoppage at the Anaheim theme park in 40 years. Members of the Master Services Council, an alliance of unions representing the custodians, ride operators, candy makers, merchandise clerks, and other Disneyland employees on Friday, just this past week, 2 days ago Friday, voted 99% in support of a walkout. As a result, union leaders now have the option to call a strike if they are unable to negotiate a new contract with Disney. Quote, "We've stood up and we showed Disney that we won't sit idly by and allow them to intimidate, surveil, and unlawfully discipline cast members for exercising their rights," the union team said in a memo. "A strike is always a last resort," the memo continues, "and we have committed to return to the bargaining table Monday and Tuesday." That's tomorrow and Tuesday, kids. Prepared to bargain in good faith. That is where it stands right now. They have been trying to bargain with the Walt Disney Company, more pay for the workers, changing work conditions. The staff at Disneyland have complained about a number of issues. Disney, to this point, has been unwilling to budge. The union now has a ready-to-go strike authorization. So basically, at this point, it sounds like if Disney doesn't give in, Disneyland is probably going to get shut down rather quickly. Ron, I know you don't necessarily cover labor law, but your thoughts on this as we get into this.
From a legal point of view?
Yeah, I mean, is there? I mean, once you got a strike authorization, there's not a whole lot Disney can do if they don't give in to the
No, I mean, I think the political and the bargaining and leverage issues that we've discussed so much over the last year or so are interesting here. I mean, it's not exactly a strong time for Disney financially,
no,
or politically. Labor unions have always been there. Well, there've been some exceptions, the old Reagan coalition notwithstanding, but historically labor unions are associated with the left.
Mm-hmm.
They have become very, very ideological and ugly in the last few months, especially with
just to quickly say, Ron, you're exactly right. The icon for this particular union and for this particular effort is the communist fist, the Marxist fist in a Mickey glove. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, 100%. So Disney, we all know about the wokeness problem at Disney. On the other hand, companies do usually get a pass for, even union busting. I mean, the Times had the New York Times back before your guys' time in the 80s, responded to a pressman's strike by closing up their New York printing operations, opening a plant in New Jersey. And, they remained the voice of progressive truth and justice in the American way. So,
yeah, and then there was also the famous air traffic controller strike where Reagan just said, "You're fired." So,
but that was Reagan. That was
right.
Reagan.
That was Reagan. But no, to the point here, to what you just said, Disney obviously, Ron, can't just pack up Disneyland and move to Nevada, right? In the same, so their backs are totally against the wall, and I'm a little surprised that Disney let it get this far. They had to have known coming into this that, there's not a whole lot they can do. And like we talk about with Disney, you're right. They are not in the most financially robust situation in the world. They're not dire, but they're not great right now. And Disneyland is the number 2 theme park for them. And theme parks are the biggest revenue generators at the Walt Disney. I mean, both top line in total revenues and profits in terms of how that works.
About half of their profits.
You've got the Orlando Resort, which is substantial. That's the biggest single piece of the Walt Disney Company.
Profits.
Yeah, and then you've got Disneyland, which is the next one behind it. Although it's a fraction of what Orlando is, it's not that much smaller of a fraction. It's still a big chunk. So for Disneyland to shut down for an indeterminate period of time, potentially here, they go to the negotiating table Monday and Tuesday, and they don't come up with something that the union bosses here are going to be amenable to. This is going to be an interesting one, kids, because we're still in the heat of what it should be the big travel, vacation, park going season of the summer. That's gonna put some big dents, and we've got an earnings call for the Walt Disney Company on Tuesday morning, August 7th, I think it is. So even though Disney will probably report maybe a decent quarter for the end of June 30th. They're going to tout things like Inside Out. Hey, Pixar's back at the box office and all this. We're going to get all that pomp and circumstance from Bob Iger. The question is, how good do the parks look? And there's a lot of concern about the performance of the parks this summer. We're going to get a much clearer picture in this next earnings call if the rumors have been true that it's been not that great.
But for that reason, it might very well make sense for the union to not to strike, but also not to enter into a long-term contract. But to just keep negotiating by the contract. Unions do that all the time.
Yep.
You keep the existing deal in place while you negotiate, and one of the things you hope for is that if things improve, or you eventually do reach a settle on a contract, you get retroactive benefits. Going back to the time when whatever delta you achieve in negotiations. Now, Disney isn't necessarily looking to give more. In fact, they're going to be crying poverty, and they very well say, "Listen, things are we notwithstanding the lies that we tell to our shareholders." There's not a real big upside here, guys. On the contrary, we're looking at cutting back. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I think so too, and Disney did make this one comment that I can't wait to see how they pull this off. I mean, some 14,000 workers at Disneyland, Disney California Adventure in downtown Disney are simultaneously bargaining for new contracts. They're seeking wage increases to keep up with the cost of living in Southern California, which ironically, a lot of these same members of this labor union voted for these massive inflation in cost of living in California, whether they realize it or not. But they also want to reward senior employees as well as stronger safety measures and changes to the company's attendance policy. Disney has publicly stated that Disneyland, quote, will remain open and ready to welcome guests if any number of employees go on strike. I would love to know. Yeah, I would love to know the pixie dust that they're going to pull out of their butt to be able to keep a park open if 80 to 90% of its cast is gone.
So let me translate that. The number of cast members, and that's what they call employees at Disneyland and Disney World and other Disney parks. But,
right.
The percentage that are in this union is about 40%. That's still enough to shut down the parks, of course. But what Disney is clearly doing with their language is that Disneyland is more than the park. Now, Disneyland is a theme park, but it's also a resort. It encompasses 2 theme parks. It also encompasses 3 hotels and a downtown retail space. Disney can maintain that statement to be true if both parks are shuttered, but third-party restaurants are open inside Disneyland and they keep their parking garages open. And surely they would move any staff they need to keep the hotels open since those reservations are made.
Right. The reservations would likely get canceled if they can't open the parks, because that's who's going to stay there.
Right. The theme parks would be the first thing to either have their hours stripped down or curtailed or switch to one theme park per day and rotate them in and out, whatever they have to do. But Disney can technically keep open the resort with a very low number of employees by keeping the retail space with little restaurants that their third parties run. That's a complete nothing burger statement from Disney. It means almost nothing.
But I have to wonder, I mean, like if you're going to have to either seriously reduce capacity in the parks with a huge drop off in staff, if this were to happen, and I mean, or you have to limit the hours or limit the days, I would presume that it's also going to have a big impact on the Disney shopping area, and of course the resorts for people coming in to stay to go to the parks, which now may be only semi-functional. Or, would Disney then have to refund a lot of these guests for having a limited experience because of this? I have no idea. So, like, one way or the other, this is going to have a relatively significant impact on the parks. And I think
Disney does not want them to go on strike. There's no way Disney wants them on strike. It's a bad look. The union, and I'm curious what Ron thinks about this, though. The union may want to go on strike for the visibility, at least the union bosses. It seems to me that a lot of times these union bosses, they want to go to the war because then they get to be the warriors who get the win at the end of it. And they'll get some kind of win. I mean, they're not going to go on strike and come out with nothing. They're going to get something, and then they get to claim they got the something.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose.
Yeah. No, I think this comes obviously at a really bad time for Disney. Not that there's ever really a good time to have a strike, but this definitely comes at a bad time for Disney, given some of the nature of the news that we've heard with the softening attendance at parks. I think when it comes to the parks on the earnings call, I suspect what we're going to hear is that the international parks are seeing some record attendance, some very good numbers. They've been touting them for a while. Obviously, Disney is planning to spend a significant chunk of that $60 billion promised CapEx in the international parks. And I think it's because the capacity over there, or the attendance over there, seems to be getting a little bit better, and it's pretty strong. But again,
how does that cut, you think, value? Yeah.
I was going to say, but compared to the domestic, I mean, nothing is ever going to touch Orlando, at least not for the foreseeable future. You can put all the international parks together, and they still don't drive the revenue.
Close.
Yeah, they don't even come close to what Orlando does. To
put that in perspective, the Hong Kong resort brings in 1/70th of the revenues of Walt Disney World. That's just so people understand the perspective.
Yeah. But Ron, you had a question on, I'm sorry.
Well, it's Anaheim. Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't help Anaheim to be the suckiest, to be the oldest and least dynamic and least upside or, facing park.
Yeah.
Well, here's one for you both. I'm not sure this is Disney's problem. I mean, it's their problem, but it's not their fault. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, well, I don't know. Maybe I should take that back. Let me explain.
Oh, let me just say that since hanging out with you guys, Disney has been the fault of just about everything in my life.
Well, that's why I had to pull myself
everything
back
that
a bit.
The Jews are not responsible for, I have been blaming on Disney.
I almost ruined my own brand, Ron. So I've got the marketing team calling me right now. Jonas, leave me alone. Here's what I'm trying to get at, though. Disney cannot control how bad things have gotten for trying to live in Southern California with the cost of living versus what you make. And the Disneyland employees also cannot help the fact that they can't afford off of this salary to survive. So that's a no-win situation for both sides. Disney is, if Disney wants to pay them more, or if they have to pay them more, then guess what? The ticket prices are going to have to go up, and then people don't want to go to Disney. This is a vicious cycle that's created by the California economy and the politics of California, of which, and this is why I pulled myself back, of which Disney is intrinsically linked, and so are the employees. They're both feeding into a system of a one-party state where dissonance is not allowed and where the economy is wrecked. So I can't fully abdicate them of the wrong, but at least they're somewhat ignorant and can't help the fact that they've put themselves in the muck that they exist in.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, look, the biggest problem I think coming up on that earnings call is the parks. They're going to try to tout the movie theaters. You got Inside Out 2, Deadpool like we've been talking about, looking like that's going to be opening with a tremendous weekend. They will try to ride that as much as they can to obscure some of the other things that aren't going as well. And remember, kids,
can you imagine? Can you imagine if it's on strike when they do the earnings call? I don't think they will.
Yeah, but I don't think they. I mean, we're still 2 weeks away from that. I think Ron's right. I think we'll have some type of temporary contract put in place for operations to continue while they continue negotiations, especially now that the strike has been authorized overwhelmingly. So the union now has well, you can give us this, or I can push a button right now, and your employees walk out of the parks 5 minutes from now. That's it. I mean, because they can do it now. But the issue is that they'll try to tout the movie theaters. They will have to deal with the parks. They'll have to also deal with the fact that it's very possible that DTC, direct to consumer, Disney Plus, may slip back into losses. I mean, they seem to talk about that last quarter. They seem to guide forward very cautiously. They gave us look, we promised you we'd show a profit before the end of fiscal 24. Here it is. We had $2 in profit. I know it was like 40 million. I get it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like $2. We showed a profit before the end of fiscal 24, which is September 30th of this year. But they said that is not going to be linear, no pun intended, meaning the profits and the growth on the profits not going to be linear, meaning that don't expect the next quarter, the quarter that they're about to report on in 2 weeks, that it's going to go up to $500 million or to $100 million. They seem to tell us that, we might see a loss in this quarter. I think they're going to go backwards, or they're going to show something that is maybe a slight bit better than what we got. We could be surprised. I don't know, but they seemed very tepid during that last earnings call that we had in May, which they were already 6 weeks into the quarter that they're about to report. So I think the writing was on the wall. So they could potentially have bad news on parks. They could potentially have bad news on DTC. We got more and more articles coming out now talking about how not just Disney, but for a lot of folks, we're direct-to-consumer. Well, maybe it wasn't all that we thought it was cracked up to be, and the studios can't actually replace the money that they were making on traditional TV with streaming. It's like we said that for years, and it's funny. The press is just now starting to figure this out and say it publicly. It's kind of like saying 3-4 years ago, "Boy, Joe Biden doesn't look right," and now finally, we're watching the press come around magically all one day saying, Joe Biden sure doesn't look right. It's kind of the same thing here, watching the Hollywood trades talk about the streaming side of things. But make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.